Hello everyone, my name is Rob Childs from the GSMA's AI for Impact team. For those of you that have been following our webinar series to date, you'll be aware that here at the GSMA, the AI for Impact team have been supporting governments, mobile operators and other relevant local stakeholders in a number of in-country implementations to develop mobile big data and artificial intelligence capabilities. All this with the support of UK government's Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office funding. What follows is an interview that was recently recorded between myself and Fiacre Mushimire from the Rwanda Utilities Regulatory Authority, and also my colleague Dr. Charlie Harrison, who works alongside me in the AI for Impact team and has been directly involved in the development of capabilities in Rwanda over the last few months. That recording contains sharing of the insights, the lessons learned, and also some of the future aspirations for the project in Rwanda. If you haven't been following the webinar series to date, I'd encourage you to visit the AI for Impact webpage. There you'll find links to the entire series, which cover a number of key themes when looking to develop mobile big data and AI capabilities in your country. And also I'd encourage you, whilst you're there, to take a look at the recently published report, Utilising Mobile Big Data and AI to Benefit Society, which focuses on the activity that the GSMA's AI for Impact team have been doing over the last 12 months and really captures there all the key insights, learnings, and best practice recommendations on how to develop capabilities that can best support governments and other relevant stakeholders in the COVID-19 response. But now, time for that spotlight interview on Rwanda. So I'd like to thank Fiacre and Charlie for joining me today to share with us their experiences and ambitions for the Rwanda work. But before we go into the Q&A with them, I thought it first useful to give a little bit of context on the in-country activity in Rwanda itself. So the first thing to highlight is that the project in Rwanda is very much an ongoing activity. So the insights and lessons that we'll be sharing today are of the moment, which I'm sure will come out and be clear during the Q&A with Fiacre and Charlie. So to further set the scene a little bit for our audience, in Rwanda, the first case of COVID-19 was discovered on the 14th of March in 2020. And the government response included a countrywide lockdown and suspension of domestic travel. And as you can see on the slide in front of you, and as the images show, the COVID-19 has obviously had an impact on public transport usage across Rwanda. So social distancing has reduced passenger capacity on buses. There have been behavioural changes from citizens. We've observed switching from bus to using other vehicles, such as licensed motorbikes. And obviously, general movement restrictions have affected the demand by reducing the number of journeys and putting different priorities for the citizens that are using these services. So these changes in usage, capacity and mobility patterns therefore have led to a potential mismatch in the supply and demand, and hence the project's objective is to generate insights using mobile big data and combining this with transport and infrastructure data to inform national bus route optimization for a better match to the current demand. Now, with this insight, the anticipated impacts are, of course, ideally more efficient public transport routes, hoping to have less crowded buses, people being more able to travel in cost-effective and environmentally friendly ways. But I won't go on more about that. I'll let my guests talk about this as we go into the Q&A. And it's worth also noting as well that there are multiple partners participating. In fact, we had a representative from one of those, Angelos Manzero from the Ministry of ICT, join us in our webinar 6 of this series. So you can also listen back to that to find out more about some of the activity there. But at this point, I would like to move to the Q&A, and I'd like to invite Fiacre and Charlie to join me. So Charlie, let me begin with you, if that's okay. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the product that's actually under development at the moment.
Sure. So, as you explained in your intro, the public transport sector in Rwanda, I think like just about everywhere else, has been very heavily disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So we wanted to see how mobile data could help to address this disruption and try to build resilience and look towards a more robust recovery after the crisis has abated. So the tension between supply and demand that you alluded to, with demand being diverted into other sources, but also supply being constrained, this has put the public transport operators under a lot of pressure. They are commercial organizations in Rwanda, and it's important that they're able to operate efficiently in order to continue providing a service to the public at an affordable price, whilst remaining commercially viable themselves. The Rwandan government also is investing a lot in improving their road infrastructure, and there are opportunities there to use mobile data to decide how to prioritize and how to focus that investment. So from the mobile data, we're able to construct a picture of how people move around the country, and we can compare the pictures that we build before and after lockdown measures are introduced. And we can also carefully tailor the way we construct these pictures, for example, to highlight commuter journeys or to pick out trips that involve detours in order to get from an origin to a destination. And so we build a set of these carefully designed pictures, and we use them to address two different questions in this case. So the first question, as you mentioned, was how many buses are needed to meet current levels of demand? So bus travel in Rwanda is arranged around a set of transport corridors. And we looked at journeys taken in the directions of these corridors, and also at the size and capacity of the existing bus fleet, and at estimated travel times across the various routes. And then we assembled all of this data into an optimization model that we built to allocate buses from the fleet to routes in order to cover the observed demand from the mobile data, with as few return bus journeys as possible. And so we hope that this model, this information, will help RURA to decide how many vehicles should be licensed to each route, and set collective standards, essentially, that operators need to meet in order to serve the public demand. And then secondly, we looked a bit more closely at those travel time estimates, and we tried to find journeys, one district to another, that seem to go via some intermediate location. So you're taking a detour, essentially, to get from one place to another. And this suggests that those two districts are not very well connected, not directly. So the road infrastructure between them needs some improvement. And the mobile data can tell us in a bit more detail about the detours that are being taken, and it can allow us to prioritize sections according to how many people are actually taking that journey. So we hope that this information can help MININFRA, the Ministry for Infrastructure, and also the Transport Development Agency in Rwanda, to make better decisions about how to invest in the road network in order to get the best possible economic and social return for the whole of the country.
Great, thanks, Charlie. So Fiacre, maybe we can bring you in at this point. It's clear from Charlie's description there, the project is focused on an application in the area of transportation. So can you perhaps please explain a little why this is so important from a RURA perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Robert. As Charlie said, it's actually extremely important for us because if you look at vehicle ownership, in Rwanda we have like around 5 cars for 1,000 persons. So public transport is a massive support to the economy, and it has been hit really hard by COVID. As you said specifically, not only the government has imposed strict requirements for the public transporters, reducing by half the capacity of the buses, but we've had strict lockdowns where the public transport companies were not even allowed to operate. And the consumers themselves, because of the fear of being around strangers, even if you all have masks, even if you all take precautions, COVID has changed how people move, how individuals move, and this is affecting negatively the revenues of the public transport operators, and we can't afford them to go bankrupt because not so many people have their own vehicles. So it is extremely important for RURA to partner with GSMA to be able to build a bigger picture. What has COVID done to this very crucial industry, and what can we learn about it? That was the first question. And And then number two, how can we use to come up with mechanisms to either resolve the problem or at least be able to anticipate the full impacts that this might have, given the multiple lockdowns, the changes in the disease, and so on. So this is extremely crucial for us. It is a public regulated utility here. It is even more crucial for us because the low ownership of vehicles, and as the authority that both has to ensure but also to ensure operators' revenues, because we're the authority that sets the fares, we need to understand what is happening in the ecosystem. So we're extremely fortunate to have the GSMA team on board. They helped us generate this data, understand the streams of individuals' movement, but also understand how the operators are reacting to this. So I think in a few words, that is basically it to us, because it is one of the crucial, vital elements of the economy, and number two, because of the impact that it has by enabling individuals without their own vehicles to move around the country, which again create jobs and so on. So it was extremely important for us from that perspective, and we wanted to see if we could get an even bigger overview of what is happening in the ecosystem from the business side, but also from the socio-economic side, from the direct response of the consumers. And since we are the authority that sets the tariff, this is not an open market, so the operators can't just raise prices to meet the demand. So, for example, in case that we have, there are some subsidies that the government has issued. So we're actually using some of the data generated in this to be able to understand how to distribute those subsidies so that we have universal access to this particular service.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying, particularly RURA's role in this and why it's potentially valuable to you. So, Charlie, maybe to cast a little bit more light on that, why is it that mobile big data is so relevant for this type of activity or analysis?
Yeah, so I think the first key point to make is that in Rwanda, although vehicle ownership is quite low, as Fiacre was just explaining, mobile phone penetration is extremely high. So more than 80% of the population have mobile phones and access to mobile technology. And so this gives an amazing level of coverage and insight into the behaviors of the population, far, far greater than you could ever get from a survey of travel habits. And we're able to collect observed behaviors rather than relying on stated behaviors as you would with a survey, which are subject to the whims of memory and disclosure. Of course, it's important to state at that point, I think, that the data is fully anonymized and aggregated before it's used for any analysis. So there's no danger of disclosing any privacy sensitive information at this point. We're only interested in how groups of people behave rather than what any individual may or may not do. But the second point to say about the value of mobile data is that it's very quick to collect. The mobile companies already have the infrastructure needed to generate and to handle the data. And it's extremely responsive. So we're able to see patterns changing on a day-by-day basis from a few weeks ago. And with some extra investment in computing capacity and analytical capabilities, this could easily be brought down to a few days or even less. This makes it an extremely powerful tool for observing trends and for responding to trends promptly.
Great. Thanks for explaining that a little better for us, Charlie. So, Fiacre, maybe turning back to yourself, given that obviously you now have had some experience of using mobile big data insights, and as Charlie mentioned, to be clear for our audience, that's about using aggregated, anonymized data, looking at population volumes and movements rather than contact tracing, which is an expression we've heard an awful lot of in the last 12 months. So having had that experience of mobile big data insights for the transport system and thinking about development and enhancement, can you share where you think mobile big data insights could also be applied to other applications in Rwanda beyond that transport example we've been talking about?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Absolutely. We have actually quite a few numbers of ideas on where we might need this as Charlie said, understanding the behavior of the transporters was one area. But for example, if looking through how individuals move across the country, it enables you to understand which routes needs the, for example, in terms of maintenance of constructions of roads or bridges. This thing that it would be extremely useful, because you can actually optimize your current transport system, your infrastructure, not necessarily the buses. So it gives you an idea of who goes where and how. So the second one thing, for example, for the cases where you are like a business, let's say, for example, like a bank, and you want to open a new branch, it is extremely hard for you to know who has the money and why did they have to do this. But if this kind of data was available to you, you'd actually realize that individuals close to a particular market have to travel tens of kilometers to be able to find the nearest branch and generate insights on where you should be able to place these kind of things. For petrol stations, for example, if you want to know the most optimal distance for where you should build a new petrol station, this would be very, very useful. And then there's, of course, something not related to COVID, but can be very useful, is in the healthcare sector. We have other diseases, on the continent, not just COVID. We have some sporadic random outbreak of Ebola or some kind of tropical disease. That would also be, if you already have an overview of where the individual generally move from and where they go. So you can actually, in terms of focus on prevention or areas that you might expect to be hotspots, you already have in advance how individuals move across time, and you can use this thing to set up hotspots to expect where this thing may rise from. But also we have some other diseases like malaria, where the itself is the carrier of the disease. So you go in an area, you get bitten by a mosquito, then you carry the disease with, across 10, 20, 50 kilometers. And then when you go again, the mosquitoes that are there, you basically, the human is the vector of the disease in this particular case. So if you understand these kind of things, you can be able to predict a disease outbreak before they even start happening. You can understand where you should put an emphasis, the focus, the first area, the hotspots, but the secondary area as well. And for preventions or for even medical treatment, this will be very, very useful. So there's a lot of other areas where this kind of information can be useful, from the private sector to academia, research, to optimization of road constructions, to banking. There's a lot of areas you can use this massive amount of information for. So, and that's actually the kind of we're trying to look for. That is why we partnered with GSMA, is for the ability to explore what kind of use can there be. We have some that we're thinking, and very much sure that other people might be extremely interested in exploring new areas as well.
Great, thank you. You summed it up really well there. I think that there are so many areas and potential applications, and it sounds like a lot of those are on your radar already in Rwanda. So maybe just a short question to close this session. Do you have any, and this is for yourself, Fiacre, do you have any practical recommendations for others that maybe in a similar position to yourselves at RURA on how to go about developing these kind of capabilities using mobile big data?
Yes, so we've learned a couple of lessons ourselves, from the data to the infrastructure to the processing to the ethical implications of these kind of things, to the policy implications and data protection aspects of this. So again, this is why we partnered with an organization like GSMA, because they do this kind of thing on a daily basis. So they've been very helpful for advising. They provided us with some tools, for example, the DPIA that help us assess the impact on privacy of individual, strong backgrounds, the trainers, the consultants. We have learned quite a couple of things that would be very useful. The first one for me would be to look at this as an opportunity. If you look at the developed world, you have massive, gigantic companies like Google that are making a killing because of the massive amounts of data that they have. But when you go to the developing nations, you realize that data really, all the services, all the digital services that we use, Facebooks and the Googles, they don't share that data with us. But on the other hand, we have millions of individuals with mobile phones recording so much data about them, and I don't mean personal conversations, but for example, handovers, where the people move from and where they go, which can in turn be used to help inform policy decisions or measure policy impact. And this is extremely useful because it gives us an option of seeing on the entire territory the impact of specific decisions that are taken. For example, when a new lockdown comes in place, you can actually use this data to see how compliance is happening, who or what areas you should put focuses on, or when you can literally measure this in real time as it happens. And I think this is something that we need to embrace. The second one is, of course, having partners, from the policymaker to the telecommunication companies themselves. And then, of course, you will need the capacity to be able to do this, both the skills and the infrastructure. Those would be the practical recommendations that I'm thinking on the top of the head. So basically, build the infrastructure, have the best partners, and be open, embrace this, because it is really something. Because this data anyway, it is not doing anything. In the majority of the cases, we aren't actually even storing this data because the huge volume means that it is expensive for us to store. But if we can gain some value from it, then it actually makes sense for why we should invest into keeping it. So those would basically be my practical recommendations. Yeah, maybe Charlie, something I missed?
I think that was a really good summary, Fiacre. Yeah, building a value proposition is obviously essential before it's worthwhile justifying the investment, of course. Partnerships are really important. Yeah, I think you did a good job.
Great, thank you both. The last thing then for me to do is to thank both Fiacre and Charlie for joining me here to shine a spotlight on the ongoing work in Rwanda, and of course wish you well for the continuation of this valuable work going forward as well. Thanks both.
Thank you.
Well, take care.